used to think my dad was handling the grief well. When Mom passed away 5 years ago, he didn't cry at the funeral. He just held my hand tightly, his jaw clenched, staring at the closed casket like it had personally betrayed him. I cried enough for both of us. I was 19 then, old enough to understand death, but still young enough to feel cheated by it. Dad, on the other hand, just adjusted. He stopped watching TV, gave up on mowing the lawn with care, stopped shaving, stopped cooking anything that wasn't frozen. But he didn't spiral the way I expected. He didn't drink, didn't yell, didn't leave the house either. He just sort of turned inward. But it was the radio that got me worried. It started about a year after she died. I came home from school one weekend, back from the dorms to help clean out the attic. I walked into the living room and saw him there, in his recliner, hunched forward slightly with his elbows on his knees, his face pale in the soft light of the old standing lamp beside him. The radio on the side table was on, an old boxy tabletop thing with 2 knobs and a cracked speaker grill. I remember frowning at it. There was no music, no voices, not even static, just silence. He didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, trying to figure out if maybe the radio was broken and he was just zoning out. But then he reached out and turned the dial, ever so slightly, like he was fine-tuning something. Still no sound came out. "Dad?" I said gently. He didn't look at me. Just kept turning the dial until it clicked softly into place. "I'm listening to your mother," he said. The way he said it, calm, factual, unnerved me more than if he'd said it with a tear in his eye or a note of desperation. This wasn't grief, it was belief. I almost laughed, thinking maybe he was being poetic. Maybe this was just some quiet ritual, but he wasn't being poetic. Not in the slightest. "I found her station about 6 months ago," he continued. "Takes a while to lock it in. It moves around." I swallowed. "Her station?" He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but not in that crying way. More like he hadn't blinked in a while. "Not every night. She only speaks when she wants to. Mostly I just listen. She breathes." My mouth was dry. "Dad, Mom's been gone a long time." He nodded once. "I know, but she's not gone. She's waiting." That conversation haunted me for months, but I let it go. I had classes. I had work. I convinced myself it was a phase, just one of those weird things people do to cope. Still, every time I came home, I saw the radio on the side table. Still playing silence. Still holding his focus like a sermon. Over time, it became a background fixture, part of the new normal, until last week. It was the first time I'd stayed overnight in nearly a year. I'd gotten a job offer in town and planned to crash at Dad's while looking for an apartment. We made small talk over dinner, leftover chili he reheated, and he seemed sharp enough, if still distant. Afterward, he went into the living room, sat in his recliner, and turned on the radio. I lingered in the kitchen, watching from the doorway. He adjusted the dial with those same precise movements, pausing now and then, fingers twitching slightly as though responding to something. The silence from the speaker was absolute. Not even that faint hum of electronics you normally get. No clicks, no fuzz, no feedback. I stayed there for a long while, just watching him watch nothing. Eventually, I made my way to the hallway, but I didn't go to bed. I stayed up, restless, the eerie quiet from the living room pressing in on me through the walls like a growing pressure. At around 1:30 a.m., I walked back down the hall. He was still there, staring, breathing slowly. I told myself it was just nostalgia or mental illness, but something about the way he leaned forward in his chair, the angle of his head tilted just so, like he was listening to something small and fragile. It kept my feet planted in the doorway. Then he said without looking up, "She misses you." I froze. "What?" "She says she misses you. She knows you think this is crazy." The hair on my arm stood on end. "Dad, you can't hear anything on that." He held up a hand, not angrily, just warning me. I shut my mouth. He looked back at the radio. "She wants you to listen," he said after a while. I didn't know what to say, but he got up slowly and motioned to the recliner. "You don't have to talk," he added. "Just sit." The air in the room felt heavier somehow, like the dust in the corners had thickened. I stepped forward, sat in the chair, and leaned back. The cushions were still warm from his weight. The lamp's light buzzed faintly above me, casting a dim orange glow across the carpet. He adjusted the dial again, more gently this time. Still no sound. We sat like that for 10 minutes, then 20. My eyes started to feel dry. My heartbeat slowed. I was just starting to think about getting up when there was a breath. It didn't come from my dad. It didn't come from me. It came from the radio. Faint, female. A single inhale, raspy and long, followed by an exhale that shuddered near the end. I sat bolt upright. "Did you hear it?" my dad whispered. I nodded slowly, my mouth dry. The breath came again, then again, always at irregular intervals, sometimes a few seconds apart, sometimes close to a full minute. I sat, frozen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was some ambient recording. Maybe he'd rigged the radio with a Bluetooth speaker or something. Maybe this was some elaborate trick to keep me from moving out. But there were no devices, no hidden players, nothing on the table but that old wood-paneled box with the 2 knobs and the dead speaker, and that breathing. It was wrong somehow, not just eerie, not just sad, wrong, like it was coming from somewhere that didn't have lungs anymore. Then it changed. On the 6th or 7th breath, I heard a shift in pitch. Not words, but something close, like the breath caught against phantom vocal cords. There was a tremor in it, something emotional, not mechanical. She was trying to speak. I stood up too fast and nearly knocked over the lamp. Dad didn't react. He just nodded at me like he understood. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling. The hallway behind me suddenly looked too dark, too narrow. The walls felt too close. I turned and walked quickly to the guest room and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep. I lay on the bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening. Occasionally I thought I heard movement down the hall or the creak of the floorboards outside my door. But it never got closer. The breathing stayed in the living room. When morning came, I stepped out and found the radio turned off. Dad was cooking eggs like nothing had happened. When I asked him about it, he smiled faintly and said, "You'll understand more tonight." I told myself I was going to leave, that I'd pack up and find a hotel or sleep in my car if I had to. But I didn't. That night I sat back down in the chair, and the breathing wasn't alone. The next night something was waiting. I don't mean waiting in a sentient way like it knew I was coming, but there was a presence, some subtle change in the air before I even reached the living room, like walking into a space where someone had just whispered and the words were still echoing somewhere you couldn't hear. I hovered in the doorway again. Dad was already in his chair. The radio was already on. He didn't say anything this time, just gestured toward the other chair, the smaller one, not nearly as comfortable. A little lopsided, I sat without speaking. The house was so quiet, no traffic outside, no fridge hum, no wind, like the house was holding its breath with us. Then the radio did it again, the breathing. It came in slow and deep, almost gentle, like someone curled beneath a blanket, hovering between sleep and awareness. Each breath was paced like a metronome, too steady to be random, too human to be a machine. That's what unnerved me most. It wasn't garbled or distorted. It wasn't recorded. It sounded live. My mind fought the logic. Maybe it was feedback. Maybe there was a frequency bleed from some ham radio operator or a neighbor's baby monitor or a pre-programmed loop. But all of that felt too easy, too clinical. I couldn't deny the weight I felt in my chest, that this was her, that this was Mom, or something wearing the shape of her. And then, it spoke, only once, a word, no, a sound just short of a word, a syllable wrapped in breath, la. It came between exhales, broken and fragile. I snapped my head toward the speaker, eyes wide. Dad didn't react. He just stared, breathing with it now, unconsciously matching its rhythm. I sat still, my spine locked in place, trying not to move. The room felt too thick, the air syrupy. I could feel my own pulse in my ears. Then something even worse happened. The radio responded to me. There was a pause in the rhythm, 3 long seconds of silence, and then the sound of a breath being pulled in too fast, like someone surprised. Startled, the voice, whatever it was, knew I was there. I got up. I walked backward, my eyes never leaving the radio, and ducked into the hallway again. My hands were trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall. That night, I dreamed of her, but it wasn't a memory. I was standing in the kitchen, or maybe the dream version of it, where things look the same but feel off. Every drawer was open. The stove had a black scorch mark across the front, and in the hallway leading to the living room, a shadow stretched across the floor, long and unmoving, like someone was standing just beyond the corner where I couldn't see. She whispered again, not from the corner, from behind me, "Don't let it in." I woke up gasping. It was still dark. I turned on the bedside lamp. 3:12 a.m. My skin was cold with sweat, like I'd been dropped in ice water. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, Dad was out in the backyard trimming a hedge that didn't need trimming. He had that same vacant, distracted look on his face. "Dad," I said cautiously, "when did you start hearing her voice?" He didn't look up. "2 weeks ago." "But you've been listening for over a year." He nodded. She was resting. I wasn't ready. I stepped closer. "What does she say?" "Not much, mostly breath, sometimes warnings, sometimes memories." He finally turned, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. "But last night was different. You heard something too?" He paused. "She said your name." I froze. "You're sure?" She said Eli, just once, like she was trying to wake you. I didn't know what to say. I suddenly felt like a trespasser in my own home, as if there was a private conversation happening over a frequency I was never meant to hear. Something ancient and intimate that didn't belong to me. Dad must have sensed my discomfort, because he clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't be afraid. She always loved you. This is just her way of coming back." That afternoon, I left the house and walked the neighborhood. I needed air, needed movement, needed anything but silence. Every time I passed another person, I wanted to ask, "Do you ever hear the radio?" But I knew the answer. This was just ours. That night, I considered locking my bedroom door, but that felt like an admission of fear. Instead, I left it open. Just before midnight, I stepped back into the living room. Dad was asleep in the recliner. The radio was still on. The silence coming from it wasn't pure anymore. There were tiny crackles now, like dry leaves brushing over stone, faint hitches between breaths, background noise. I stared at it for a long time, and I swear I heard a second voice. Not Mom's, not Dad's, another, just a whisper, low and scratchy, barely audible beneath the breathing, but the tone was wrong. Off. It didn't sound human. My ears strained toward the speaker. That's when the voice said something that made my skin ice over. Not her, that was it. 2 words, a rustling hiss like sand over glass. But I knew what it meant. That voice, whatever it was not Mom. I turned the dial. Immediately, the breathing stopped. The static returned for half a second. Then it went dead. Back to that perfect, impossible silence. Dad stirred in his chair, blinking awake. "Why'd you do that?" he said groggily. "There was something else," I said. "Something bad." He frowned. "You don't understand. That's just interference. Sometimes it gets noisy. You have to wait for it to clear." I shook my head. That wasn't noise. It talked. It knew I was here. He looked at the radio like he was considering something important. "You can't turn it once you're tuned in. That's dangerous. She might lose the signal." I wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was fear there, not of me or the radio, but of silence. He needed this, but I didn't. That night, I moved my things to the basement. I needed distance. At around 2 a.m., I heard the sound of the radio playing again. Not just breathing, movement, shuffling, and something that might have been scratching. I stayed in bed, teeth clenched, and in the quiet between those strange low sounds, I heard her again. Her real voice. "Eli," she whispered. "Don't let it take him." I shot upright, heart pounding. The voice wasn't from the radio. It was in my room, in the dark corner near the shelves of old paint cans. I scrambled for the light switch. When I turned it on, nothing was there, just the cold, still air of a basement that hadn't been used in years. The next day, I found the radio on the kitchen counter, unplugged, but still on. The cord dangled loosely from the back of the radio, frayed near the plug. It swayed slightly, like it had just been dropped, but the dial glowed faintly, its amber light pulsing in time with some invisible beat. There was no sound, not even the faint crackling I'd heard the night before. I didn't touch it. Dad wasn't in the kitchen. I stood alone, barefoot on the cold tile, just staring at the thing. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wiring. That smell you get from electronics left running too long. And then the light on the dial blinked, just once. Like an eyelid. I stepped back, nearly knocking over the kitchen chair behind me. Dad's footsteps came from the hallway, measured, slow. He entered the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel like nothing was wrong. "I don't want it in here," I said, still backing away from the counter. He frowned, looking at the radio. "I thought you wanted to listen again." "Not unplugged," I said. "It's not even plugged in." He glanced at the cord. His face didn't change. "She doesn't always need power, not when the channel's strong." I stared at him, feeling something twist in my gut. "Do you even hear yourself?" He dropped the towel onto the counter, then picked up the radio gently, cradling it like a sick cat. "You don't have to believe me, but you should respect her. She's trying. She's reaching out. She's dead." He didn't blink. "That's not the same thing." I watched him carry it back to the living room, settling into his chair again. The radio's glow brightened the moment he sat down, as if responding to his presence. I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I left the house. I walked for hours, first aimlessly around the block, then further down toward the elementary school I used to attend. Everything felt distant, washed out, like I was watching the world through a pane of frosted glass. When I came back home around dusk, the front door was cracked open. The living room was empty, but the radio sat in my chair this time. Its dial turned to face the hallway. I stood frozen in the entryway, staring at it. The sense of wrongness wasn't vague anymore. It was thick, sharp, like something had grown teeth in the silence. I stepped forward and turned the dial all the way to the left. The light went out. But even with the power off, I swore I could still feel it humming. That night, Dad didn't come home. I waited until 11, midnight, 2 a.m. I called his cell, straight to voicemail. At 3:30, I heard something outside. Not footsteps, not voices, just humming, deep and slow. A tune I didn't recognize. I went to the window. The street was empty, but the sound was louder there, close, as if it were just outside the glass. I pulled back from the curtain. The humming stopped. I didn't sleep again. By morning, I was frantic. I drove around town, checking the gas station, the grocery store, the church where he sometimes volunteered. No one had seen him. No one seemed concerned. I even stopped by the police station. I tried to explain that he was missing, that he'd been acting strange, that he hadn't come home. The officer just blinked at me. "Are you sure he's actually missing?" "He doesn't leave the house," I said. "He listens to an unplugged radio all night and says he hears my dead mother." That got me a raised eyebrow. Eventually, they promised to take a report, but I knew the look, the quiet judgment. They thought he was just old, that maybe I was the one losing it. When I got back, the house was dark again, the curtains drawn, every window covered. I hadn't done that. The front door was locked, but I had my key. I stepped inside, calling out. No answer. The radio was gone. I searched the entire house, Living room, bedrooms, closets, even the attic, nothing. But when I stepped into the basement, I heard it again, soft breathing, just behind the shelves of old books and paint cans. The sound grew clearer as I descended, not from the walls this time, not from the corner, from the floor. It was right beneath me. I dropped to my knees, heart pounding, pressing my ear to the concrete. The sound was faint, but rhythmic. Inhale, exhale, with the occasional twitch of motion, like someone shifting their weight on a creaky mattress. I backed away slowly, suddenly aware of how still the house had become. Then I heard my father's voice. "Miriam," he whispered. "Please, not him, not yet." A rustling sound followed, like fabric brushing against brick. Then the breathing stopped. I bolted up the stairs. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. I just sat by the front door, clutching the baseball bat from the hall closet and waiting for the sun to rise. It never felt like it did. The sky lightened slightly, sure, but it wasn't warm. There were no birds, just that thick, muffled silence again, as though the world had been dipped underwater. I went to the basement again. This time the radio was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, on, plugged into nothing. Its dial was turned to a new position, one I didn't recognize. The numbers were scratched off. When I leaned down, there was no breathing, just a knock from underneath, a single sharp knock on the concrete floor, then another, and another, slow, measured. I didn't wait to see what came next. I ran. I drove until my hands stopped shaking, checked into a motel 30 miles away, sat on the bed with my back to the wall, and stared at the door for hours. But I couldn't stop thinking about the voice, not my father's plea, not the strange things he'd said. Her voice, Mom's. It hadn't been warm, it hadn't been loving. It had been scared. Don't let it take him. Which meant something else was pretending to be her. And it was winning. I didn't sleep at the motel either. I left the TV on mute just for the light, but kept flinching at my reflection in the screen, half expecting to see Dad's empty eyes staring back in the glass. An hour after sunrise, I packed, checked out, and drove to the public library downtown. My phone felt useless, no signal bars no matter where I stood, so I dug through the microfilm machine instead, chasing any mention of phantom broadcasts, dead air frequencies, or unexplained disappearances tied to radios. Nothing recent, but in the 1977 local paper, I found one bizarre police blotter line: Ryburn Ave resident. Reports late-night voices on static-free band, claims my husband's down there. Officers couldn't locate source. Same street I'd grown up on. Different house number, but only 4 doors down from ours. The name on the report was Helena Hensley. I didn't recognize it, but the coincidence crawled up my spine and settled behind my eyes like a headache. On a gut impulse, I asked the reference clerk for old obituaries and found Helen's. She died in her sleep 1 year after filing that complaint, survived by no children, estate sold at auction. The address, 113 Ryburn, was a bungalow that had stood abandoned most of my childhood. Dad used to offhandedly call it the hush house, because no matter how rowdy the neighborhood kids got, we'd fall silent when we passed it. I'd always assumed it was the stale mildew smell. Now I wondered if the house had never been empty at all. I drove there, windows boarded, lawn gone to weeds as tall as my waist, a condemned sign peeling on the door. I parked at the curb, engine still running, acutely aware that I was trespassing, but I needed answers. I ducked through a gap in the warped fence and stepped onto the porch. The air felt heavier, like the atmosphere itself had thickness you could almost stir with your hand. The front door was padlocked, yet a low mechanical hum seeped through the wood in slow pulses, each one matched by a faint vibration in my sternum, exactly like the humming I'd heard outside my bedroom window. I backed away fast, shoes crunching on broken glass, and nearly toppled into the yard. That's when the ringing started. Not a phone, not a bell, a single pure tone, thin and reedy, threading between my ears like piano wire drawn tight. It had no clear direction, but the pitch spiked whenever I faced south, toward my childhood home. I got in the car, slammed the door, and the tone dulled but didn't vanish. I realized with a chill it was coming from my jacket pocket. I dragged out Dad's old pocket-sized transistor. He must have slipped it into my coat before he disappeared. The little unit's telescoping antenna was fully extended, its volume knob dead left, but the speaker glowed, a tiny ember of red behind the mesh. The tone cut out. A whisper replaced it. "Eli, help." Mom's voice, weak, like she was speaking through a long paper tube, the consonants blurred by distance. I nearly dropped the radio but forced myself to steady it. "Where are you?" I asked. My breath steamed in the cabin despite the rising heat outside. Static hissed, then cleared. "Corner. Under what?" I waited, pulse hammering. Silence, then the wrong voice broke through. Low, thick, male, or maybe not quite human at all. "He belongs to the quiet," it rasped, vowels distorted, almost metallic. "Go back to the hush house." A feedback squeal stabbed my ear, and the radio popped, the plastic casing cracking as though something had flexed outward from inside. Black smoke curled from the battery panel. I threw it onto the passenger seat and pounded the accelerator, gravel spitting behind the tires as I shot forward. I should have gone to the police again. Instead, I went home. The curtains were still drawn tight. Every room felt airless, like whatever lived in the silence had sucked out the oxygen in preparation for something bigger. I called for Dad. No answer. The living room was empty. No recliner, no lamp. Only the deep indentations in the carpet where they'd stood for years, leading my eye to the center of the room. There, flush with the floorboards, the rug had been rolled back to reveal a trapdoor I'd never seen before. It wasn't new wood. In fact, it looked older than the rest of the house. Gray planks weathered the color of bone. No handle, just a rusted iron ring set into a plank. Someone, Dad, had pried it up recently. Fresh gouges marred the edges like claw marks. A sullen vibration rose under my feet, matching the residual throbbing still lodged in my ribs. Whatever was humming had always been below us. I swallowed hard, wrapped both hands around the ring, and lifted. The door creaked open on ancient hinges. A bitter draft exhaled from the hole, stale earth and something electrical. The smell of burnt dust on hot circuits. Stairs descended into dark, no light switch in reach. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall drawer, but its LED barely cut a cone through the black. I forced myself down 1 step, 2, 10. The wood beneath my shoes was damp. Silt from decades of condensation crusted each rung. At the bottom, the beam caught walls of rough-poured concrete. I realized with a start this wasn't the basement. It extended well beyond the footprint of the house, a crude tunnel sloping deeper, built without city permits or modern equipment. My light flicked over old coal tar seep, ancient electrical cables stapled to the ceiling, none of them live yet humming faintly, somehow channeling power without current. About 30 feet in, the floor leveled into a small chamber no bigger than a garden shed. The radio sat on a wooden crate in the center, not the portable that had fried in my car, not the tabletop unit from the living room. This one was older, Bakelite shell, analog faceplate missing glass entirely, as if it had exploded outward decades ago. Inside, the vacuum tubes glowed a malignant orange, and along every inch of wire someone had tied tiny scraps of cloth, handwritten notes scrawled in faded ink. They fluttered in the draft like prayer flags. Mom's voice emerged from the speaker, throatier now, syllables drawn as if dragged through mud. "Eli, quickly." A shudder cut her off. The cloth pieces rustled as a new sound vibrated the chamber, a low rattling breath. Not through the speaker this time, from the tunnel behind me. I spun the flashlight, empty passage. A step scraped on wood far above, someone crossing the kitchen floor. Then a second set of footsteps followed, slower, heavier, as though the house itself moved in response. Dust trickled from the rafters. I realized the trap door had not shut behind me by accident. It had been pulled closed. Something was sealing me in. Mom's voice surged from the radio, urgent, words broken by static. Under the notes, "Hurry." I tore one of the paper scraps free, the old string snapping. It held a single line in Mom's handwriting. "No mistaking the loops. Breathe with me and it can't find you." My lungs locked. Involuntarily, I matched the cadence she'd used when I was a kid afraid of storms. Slow 4 count in, hold, slow 4 count out. As I did, the tunnel's vibration dipped, like a predator pausing mid-prowl, scent suddenly masked. But I couldn't keep it up. Panic clawed up my throat. The thing on the stairs clumped lower, each footfall deeper, as if the wood were stretching to accommodate mass it was never built to bear. A shadow pitched across the far wall, not cast by my light but by some dim reddish glow rising behind me, emanating from the radio tubes swelling brighter. I pressed my back to the crate, heart galloping and the air chilled painfully, my breath fogging. Another note, "If the quiet gets loud, pull the copper." Copper? I yanked away the cloth from the radio's underside. There, jammed between two tubes, a penny bleached almost silver with age but unmistakably copper. I tugged it free. Every light died. Total darkness swallowed me. The humming stopped. The world ruptured into silence so absolute my ears rang, desperate for input. Then the breathing returned. Not gentle this time, but huge, dragging, filling the tunnel like a bellows stoking a furnace. It drew near, each inhale pulling the stale air past my face hard enough to flutter my hair. Exhale washed over me, warm and reeking of earth turned centuries too long. I braced for teeth or claws. Instead, Mom spoke right next to my ear, voice clear, alive. "Listen to me. You can open another frequency. Tune with blood." My kneecaps nearly buckled. "I don't understand." From the black, her hand closed over mine. Ice cold, unmistakably bone and tendon, she guided my fingers to the jagged edge where the radio's glass faceplate had broken years ago. "Cut," she whispered. "Turn." I balked, but the presence behind us snarled. No language, just the flex of something that would not wait. I dragged my fingertip across the shard. Pain flared bright, warmth spilled. Mom, or whatever wore her memory, seized my wrist and smeared the blood across the metal dial. It spun on its own. A single chord, low thrumming like a cello string plucked in the bowels of the earth, vibrated through the dark. Light burst from the tubes, not orange now but white, searing, expanding outward as if the radio had become a lantern fired by marrow. In that light I saw the thing in the passage, too tall to stand, spine bowed, limbs too many for symmetry, each joint bulging wetly under loose sackcloth skin. Where a head might be, dozens of radios, portable, tabletop, car stereos, were fused by wires and flesh into a grotesque crown, every speaker a trembling mouth. It recoiled from the white glow. The fused radios crackled in protest. One emitted my father's voice, small and terrified. "Eli, I'm sorry." Mom squeezed my hand. "You can end this. Break the circuit." "How?" Silence inside silence. Close every channel. Her form flickered in the glare. No face, only outline, but tenderness radiated off the non-shape like heat. "The dial must stop on 0. I gritted my teeth, lunged forward, and slammed my weight onto the tuning knob. The frequency indicator rattled leftward, glyphs on the faceplate blurring past negative numbers into symbols I didn't recognize. Spirals, crescents, something like teeth. The creature wailed. Each radio in its crown spat warbling shrieks that bled into each other. I felt my eardrums flex, ready to burst. I forced the dial further until it jammed against an unmarked end stop. The sound cut, absolute hush, heavier than any noise. The creature collapsed like wet canvas. Radios shattered on the concrete. A stench of ozone and decay billowed out, then vanished, sucked inward by a pressure drop that popped my ears. Darkness slammed back as the tubes blew out in sparks. The tunnel shook, walls cracking, rubble rained. I staggered, chest heaving, feeling for Mom's hand, but the space beside me was empty. A distant creak overhead signaled the trapdoor easing open, weak daylight dripping down the stairwell. I ran, slipping on gravel, scrambled up wood steps slanting under shifting weight, and burst into the kitchen as the house bucked once like something enormous rolling beneath the foundation. Plates jumped in cabinets, then all fell still. The morning sun blazed through torn curtains. Outside, birdsong returned, timid but real. I waited for humming, for breathing, nothing. I called for Dad. This time he answered, from the living room, voice raw, Eli. He lay in the recliner, radio on his lap, cold and dark. His eyes were wet. I think I fell asleep, he muttered. Had the worst dream. I knelt, exhaustion flooding me. He didn't remember, or perhaps the dream was all he could bear to keep. I stayed at his side until he drifted in a real sleep, peaceful, chest rising with gentle rhythm that belonged entirely to him. In the silence that followed, I felt something settle inside me too. A hush that wasn't empty but safe, like the respectful quiet of a library after closing. For the first time in years, I let it be. I didn't turn the radio on again. For the rest of that week, I stayed close to Dad. We kept things simple. Pancakes in the morning, cards in the afternoon, reruns of old shows in the evening. He didn't mention the radio once, not even when I caught him glancing toward it with something like nostalgia or grief. He seemed lighter, less hollow. I didn't know if it was over, but something had changed. Still, I couldn't shake what I'd seen beneath the house. The creature's shape stuck in my brain like a bruise. That grotesque crown of radios, each one whispering with someone else's voice, and Mom, whatever remained of her, guiding me to silence it. Every night, I lay in the guest room with a hand over my chest, sinking my breath to the memory of hers. Sometimes, if I focused too long, I thought I heard it again, soft, distant, a whisper trying to slip through closed frequencies. But it never formed words, just longing. By Sunday, I felt a strange peace settle over me. We spent the day in the backyard. Dad raked leaves while I pulled weeds, both of us sweating under the sun like nothing had ever gone wrong in our lives. At one point he turned to me, brushing a leaf from his sleeve. "You're different," he said. "How so?" "You don't flinch anymore." I smiled faintly. "Neither do you." That night he went to bed early. I stayed up, rereading some of Mom's old paperbacks from the shelf in the hallway. I'd almost forgotten how many she'd collected. Dusty thrillers and pulpy romances, all with her notes scribbled in the margins. I liked hearing her voice through those sentences, the real one, the human one, sharp, sarcastic, kind. When I finally turned out the lights, it was past 2 a.m., and that's when the humming returned, faint, threading through the walls, not from the radio, but from somewhere deeper. My stomach sank. I crept into the hallway and stood still, listening. The sound came from under the floor, not the basement, but below even that, like something was rebuilding itself down in the cracks of the world. No footsteps followed. No voices called out, but I could feel it tuning again. Not a device, not a ghost. The thing, something old, something persistent. That thing I'd briefly silenced had not died. It had just gone off air, and it was returning. In the morning, Dad didn't mention anything. Neither did I. We both had the same tired look, eyes slightly red, movements a bit slower. He made toast. I made coffee. We didn't talk about what we'd heard. It became our quiet pact. Don't tune in. Don't feed the frequency. We buried the old tabletop radio in the backyard that afternoon. I made a joke about putting it 6 feet deep just in case, and Dad chuckled, but there was a tension to his movements, like some part of him still wanted to dig it back up and listen one more time. I didn't let him. That night, I slept with a white noise machine blaring. I thought it might block out any attempt the signal made to reach me, but the machine cut off at exactly 3:13 a.m. Just blinked dead. as if someone had plucked the cord from the wall. The room was too still, the kind of quiet that felt intentional. I heard my name, not whispered. Spoken. Eli. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. The voice was coming from beneath the bed, not a hiss, not a growl, not my mother's, something new, familiar in the worst way. Come back, it said. My breath hitched. I didn't move, didn't even blink. I can play anyone. A long pause, even her. Then the bed creaked, not from me, but from something underneath shifting closer to the surface. I scrambled up, flipped on the light, and dropped to the floor to look. Nothing, just dust, shadows, and a few old shoes. But the floor under the rug was warm. Too warm. The next morning, I told Dad we needed to leave the house, just for a few days. I said I wanted to visit the coast, breathe ocean air. He agreed without asking questions. We packed light, only what we needed. He even laughed when I unplugged the microwave, just to be sure. We were backing out of the driveway when he turned to me, voice low. It doesn't need the radios anymore, he said. I paused. What? He stared out the windshield. I think it remembers our voices now, like fingerprints. It can use them, even without a speaker. A chill crawled down my spine. How do you know that? He didn't answer, but in the back seat something buzzed. Not a phone, not the radio I'd smashed in the car days earlier. It was long gone. No, this was something new. Small, hidden. I pulled over and searched. Under the driver's seat, wedged into the floor mat, was a cheap plastic walkie-talkie. Old, like the kind kids used in the 90s. Its battery cover was cracked, wires exposed. I picked it up gently. The speaker was silent, then it clicked on. Let me in, it said in my mother's voice. I crushed it under my boot. We drove west without a destination, just kept putting miles between us and the house. Every small town we passed looked more like a painting than a real place. Frozen gas stations, blinking signs, faces that turned a little too slowly to watch us go by. I refused to stop in any town with a radio tower. Somewhere outside Camden, we found a run-down roadside motel flanked by a pine thicket and a shuttered diner. No buzzing lights, no visible antennas, just gravel and wind and the soft rustle of trees. Dad fell asleep quickly in the second bed, snoring lightly by the time I finished brushing my teeth. I watched him for a moment in the dim lamplight, wondering if part of him had always known it would come to this. If this was why he'd listened so long, not to remember her, but to stall it, to keep it occupied. I checked every inch of the room, unscrewed the smoke detector, opened every drawer, pulled the plug from the mini fridge. Nothing electronic remained on, but I still didn't sleep. I sat in the motel chair, watching the shadows shift across the floor, knowing that it was trying to find us, not through towers, not through wires, through remembrance. At 3:13 a.m. exactly, Dad sat up straight, his breathing suddenly shallow. I was on my feet in an instant. Dad? He turned his head slowly, his face empty, not afraid, just void. Then he opened his mouth. From his lips came my voice. I can't hear her anymore, it said. You took her. I backed toward the door. He blinked slowly, then again, like surfacing from a deep dream. He looked up at me. Did I say something? I shook my head. No. The lie stuck in my throat. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did he. By morning, we were packed again. We crossed the state line into Arkansas. Still no plan. I stopped looking at road signs. It was 3 days before we heard another voice. We were in a laundromat off a side road, washing a week's worth of panic in motel linens. I was stuffing towels into a dryer when a little girl in the corner, maybe 6, stringy hair, staring at her reflection in the vending machine glass, turned and said without inflection, "It knows your names now." Then she walked out with her mother as if nothing had happened. Dad dropped a detergent pod. Neither of us spoke until we got back to the car. That night, we stayed in a motel with no lights at all, candlelit, cabins meant for couples wanting to disconnect. The owner was a withered woman with eyes like wet ash. She took our cash without a word, handed us a key, and pointed toward the back lot. The air was thick with pine sap and mildew. Inside, I checked everything again. No electronics, not even a fan. We slept under heavy quilts in a room built before the internet. At 3:13 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone humming outside the window. Low, purposeful. I didn't look. I just lay still, gripping the edge of the bed, trying to match my breath to the rhythm again. Breathe in, 4 count, hold. Breathe out, 4 count, hold. Then it changed. The humming stopped. A new sound replaced it. Knocking. From inside the room. 3 soft raps on the wall behind my bed. Then 3 more. I turned my head, heart hammering. Dad was already awake, his eyes wide and glossy. He mouthed, "Don't answer it," but it kept knocking. Louder. Slower. Not asking. Testing. I stood, crossed the room, and put my palm flat against the wall. It was warm. Then the knock stopped, and a voice breathed directly against the wood. "We remember your frequency." In the silence that followed, something shifted behind the wall. No movement, no shuffling, just presence, like the shape of heat after lightning. I backed away, not turning, and slid into the bed like a child avoiding a monster. Dad whispered, "We can't keep running. I know. We have to end it. How?" He looked at the ceiling, at the blank wood plank sky above us. "She's still helping." I didn't ask how he knew. I believed him. The next morning, we returned home. The front yard was untouched, the trapdoor sealed, but the air hummed again, not from the ground, not from the sky, from everywhere, like the house was still trying to broadcast. We entered in silence. Dad went to the living room, I to the basement, the place where it started. The walls were marked now, lines drawn in charcoal, concentric circles radiating from the spot where I'd tuned the dial with blood. Symbols I didn't understand lined the cement like an unfinished language. The copper penny was still there, blackened. I stepped over the old notes and found one new scrap pinned to the wall with a nail. In my mother's handwriting, "It remembers noise. Give it quiet." I read it again. Give it quiet. Not just silence. Quiet. There's a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Quiet is intentional. I called down to Dad. He didn't answer. When I came back up, I found him standing in the kitchen holding the old radio. "I tuned it again," he said. "Just once, to draw it back." "You shouldn't have. I had to." He looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm going to give it quiet." He held the radio with both hands, fingers trembling. His mouth moved like he wanted to say more, but the words never left his throat. Just a shallow breath, then silence. I stepped forward. "Dad, you don't have to." "I do," he whispered. "It follows voices, it learns them, uses them. I let it in the first time. I invited it. If anyone's going to shut the door, it has to be me." I shook my head. "There's got to be another way. We don't even know what it wants." He looked up at me slowly. "Yes, we do." I stared at him. "It doesn't want her voice. It doesn't want yours. It wants mine. It's always wanted me." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "That's why it kept her. That's why it waited. It's been practicing, learning how to replace me." The air in the room felt suddenly thinner, as if the house had held its breath. Dad stepped backward toward the hallway. "Stay here. Whatever happens, don't come downstairs." He turned and walked away. I stood there, rooted. Then I heard the trapdoor creak open. I followed anyway. By the time I reached the basement steps, he was already at the bottom. The room pulsed faintly with orange light, just like before, only dimmer now, flickering like a dying filament. The air reeked of scorched copper and mildew. The tuning dial glowed weakly as he set the radio down on the same crate. I stopped at the top step. "Dad!" He didn't look up. He just adjusted the dial, fingers trembling slightly. Then the voice came through. But it wasn't Mom's this time. It was his, coming from the speaker. A perfect echo of himself. speaking the words I'd just heard in the kitchen. "I'm going to give it quiet." He froze. The radio repeated, "I'm going to give it quiet." Then again, but wrong. "I'm going to give you quiet." The light from the tubes flared and dimmed. The symbols along the wall shimmered like heat waves. Somewhere behind the concrete, a slow, dragging breath pulled inward. The creature was returning, only now it had him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. I couldn't see what was inside. He glanced up at me, just once. His voice was steady. "You were right to run, but it won't stop. Not unless someone ends the signal. What are you going to do?" He turned the dial. The radio sparked. The hum shifted. A low drone filled the room, a steady, heavy frequency that wasn't sound so much as weight. It pressed against my ribs, my eyes, my teeth. I covered my ears, but it did nothing. Dad opened the bundle. Inside was a shard of glass, the same one from the broken faceplate. He sliced across his palm. Blood dripped onto the tuning dial. The radio howled. Not feedback, not static. A scream, a layered, spiraling scream made of every voice it had ever stolen. It poured out of the speaker in a rush, overlapping syllables that bent language backward. Dad's voice, Mom's voice, my voice, all twisted and redoubled. The air turned electric. The walls trembled. Dad reached into the crate and pulled free the copper penny. He held it to his lips like a coin for Charon, then pressed it to the tube's exposed wires. The radio burst into flame. I screamed, leaping down the stairs, but he held up a hand. "Stay back." The crate collapsed beneath the weight of fire. Light poured upward in a column. The symbols on the walls caught like tinder, but there was no heat, only light, terrible and pure. The frequency deepened, lowered to a pitch I could no longer hear but could feel like an anchor inside my chest. And then I saw it, the creature's shadow stretching across the far wall. It didn't come from the tunnel this time. It came from inside the burning radio. As if the machine had become a gateway, a long spindled limb reached out from the flames. Dad stepped forward. The shadow recoiled. He opened his bleeding palm, pressed it flat to the side of the radio, and whispered something I couldn't hear. The flame flared white. The creature let out one final scream, a pure, broken broadcast from a million stolen mouths. And then, silence. True silence. Not emptiness. Not vacuum. Just peace. The tubes went dark. The light vanished. The smoke curled up and out of the hole in the trapdoor as if sucked by the sky. I stumbled forward, coughing, eyes stinging. Dad was still there, kneeling, still. I dropped beside him. He was breathing, barely. His hand burned, his eyes closed, but alive. The radio was gone, just ash. We sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. Eventually, he looked up. "It's over," he said. I turned it all the way down. The days that followed were quiet, truly quiet. There were no more knocks at night, no more humming beneath the floor, no voices calling my name through electronics. The house settled, like a muscle finally unclenched after years of tension. Dad spent most of his time outside. He started gardening again, trimmed the hedges with care, reseeded the patchy lawn. He even laughed once, really laughed, when a squirrel stole a whole tomato off the vine right in front of him. The sound startled me. It was so normal. For a while, it felt like we'd finally shaken whatever that thing was. I still didn't know if it had come from a different place or if it had always been here, buried under signals, feeding off grief and memory like mold in damp wood. But it was gone, or so I thought. A week after the fire, I found the copper penny on my nightstand, clean, polished. Too bright to be the same one, but somehow I knew it was. I asked Dad if he'd left it. He shook his head, face tightening. "It's a receipt," he muttered. "A receipt." He nodded once. "Something always comes back for what it gave up." I didn't understand at first, but I would. That night, I heard it again. Not the humming, not the static, breathing, soft, not from under the floor, from the radio in my phone. I hadn't even realized the Bluetooth speaker had powered on. The light blinked blue in the dark, even though I hadn't touched it in days. And from the speaker, Eli. I leapt up and slammed the power button. Dead silence returned, but my phone screen stayed lit, bright and white. Battery drained to 1%. It hadn't been on a moment ago. When I picked it up, the screen displayed a waveform, just a single repeating shape, a breath, inhale, exhale, then a pulse, then a whisper typed across the screen in a font I'd never seen. Tune back in. I powered it off, threw it in a drawer, turned off the breaker to the outlet just to be safe, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, Dad was already in the living room, sitting in the recliner. No radio in sight. He looked up when I entered. "You heard it again," he said. I nodded. He didn't ask for details. "I think we closed one gate," he said slowly. "But maybe there are more. You said it was over. I said that one was over." I sat on the couch staring at him. "What was it?" He took a long breath. "You ever think about how many signals we leave behind?" I said nothing. Every voicemail, every baby monitor, every recorded laugh on some dusty VHS tape. Every one of those is a kind of echo, and maybe something out there learned to listen back. The thought made my skin crawl. But why us? He looked at me, eyes sad. Because we talked back. That day we packed every radio in the house, every phone, every device with a speaker. We drove out to a quarry just past the city limits and hurled them into the water, one by one, even the TV, even the oven with its digital clock. Silence never felt so heavy. When we got back home, it felt like stepping into a different time. No screens, no dials, just walls and wood and breath. Dad seemed at peace, but I wasn't, because that night, in the quiet, I heard something new, not in the house, not in the walls. Inside me, a low vibration in my chest, just beneath the ribcage. A frequency, not loud, just present, like a memory you haven't had yet. I sat in the dark, hands pressed to my sternum, feeling it resonate gently with each breath. It didn't hurt, not yet, but it wasn't mine. It didn't belong, and I knew, whatever that thing was, wherever it came from, it had marked me. Not just by sound, by pattern, by rhythm. It had learned my breath. The feeling didn't fade. Every night I lay in bed and felt a pulse, soft, steady, just beneath my ribs. Not a heartbeat, not the usual rise and fall of breath. This was different. This was separate. Something nested in me like a second rhythm. It didn't hurt. It waited. Days passed. I avoided electronics completely, read books by candlelight, left my phone powered off and buried in the drawer. But that rhythm followed me. At the grocery store, in the car, at the lake, always there, like a presence just behind the skin, breathing when I did, but not with me. Dad could tell something was wrong. He didn't ask, not at first. He just watched me more carefully, walked slower, sat closer, started humming tunelessly under his breath, as if he was trying to drown something out. One night I broke. I think it got in. He looked up from his crossword, pen frozen mid-letter. "In where?" he asked. I pressed my palm flat against my chest. "Here." He set the paper aside, didn't speak, just nodded slowly like he'd known this was coming. Then he stood, crossed the room, and opened the hall closet. From the back, wrapped in a dish towel, he pulled out something I hadn't seen in weeks, the old radio. Its speaker grill was cracked, wires fraying from the base, the dial stuck in place with dried blood. I stepped back. "You kept it?" "I had to, just in case. You said it was over." He looked me in the eyes. "I said we turned it down, not that we turned it off." He placed it on the coffee table between us and sat. For a long time, neither of us touched it. It didn't hum, it didn't glow, but the room felt full, like something was listening. "What do we do?" I asked. He ran a finger across the dial, careful not to turn it. We find out how far the signal goes." I shook my head. "You said it remembers voices." He nodded. "Yours, mine, hers, maybe more, and if it talks back, then we don't answer." He looked at me, face stern, eyes wet. "Whatever it is, it wants participation. That's how it learns. It needs your part in the broadcast." I stared at the radio. It stared back. That night, we sat in silence with the radio between us. I watched the dial, waited. It didn't glow. It didn't crackle. It breathed. Not through the speaker, not aloud, but in me, perfectly timed. Then a voice rose, not from the radio but from my mouth, not my words, not my intention, just spoken aloud, slow and hollow. "We are nearly aligned." Dad's head snapped up. "Eli." I couldn't respond. I was still there, but underneath something. Like my breath had been overwritten. I clamped my jaw shut. My tongue ached. Something was in me, and I could feel it testing the edges of my voice like a hand trying on gloves. My chest ached. Dad stood, reaching for the radio. "I'll tune it back," he whispered. "I'll pull it out." He turned the dial slightly. The radio hissed, a high, sharp whine that made the window panes tremble. My lungs seized. "Wait!" I gasped, my own voice again. "Wait! It's in the signal. It's riding me. Then we break the broadcast." Dad turned the dial hard to the left. A snap, metallic and final. The speaker sparked. Something screamed, not from the radio, from inside me. My knees buckled. My hands went to my ears, not because of sound, but because something was moving behind them. A slithering sensation across the auditory nerves, like a tapeworm of frequency. And then, gone. My breath returned. My eyes watered. I blinked and saw Dad kneeling beside me. "Did it stop?" I rasped. He hesitated, then nodded. But I could see it in his face. He was lying. Later that night, I stood at the mirror. No glass tricks, no illusions, just reflection. I took a breath, held it, waited. And still, behind the rise and fall of my lungs, behind my own heartbeat, there it was. The second rhythm. Quiet, content, waiting for the right frequency again. Not to speak, not to listen, to broadcast. I stopped talking after that. It wasn't a decision exactly, just instinct, like covering a wound. Every time I opened my mouth, I feared something else might come out, something not mine. A phrase, a hiss, a frequency riding my vocal cords, eager to make itself known. Dad didn't pressure me. He just nodded when I grunted or pointed. We got used to silence between us, not the strained kind, just safer, familiar. The house stayed quiet, but not peaceful, because the thing inside me, the signal, wasn't dead. It was waiting. I began to notice changes in small things, patterns. Light bulbs fizzled when I stood under them too long. Digital watches blinked 3:13 before freezing. One afternoon, a neighbor's baby monitor picked up a voice that wasn't a baby's, and I saw them packing their car an hour later, never looking back. Whatever I carried, whatever I was becoming, it wasn't isolated anymore. It was bleeding out. I tried everything: fasting, meditation, noise-canceling headphones, playing white noise while I slept. But the signal didn't need sound. It lived in memory, in the shape of breath, in the pause before words. One night I dreamed I was inside a radio, not holding one, inside. Everything around me was black glass and copper wires. Tubes glowed softly in the dark, and through each one, I could see moments of my life, tiny flickering memories, distorted like they were being broadcast through bad reception. My mother's face, my father's hands, me, sitting, listening. In the dream, something crawled along the glass. Not a creature, a shape, the idea of attention. It didn't look at me. It tuned to me, and I felt something click into place. Perfect alignment. When I woke up, I couldn't move, paralyzed. My eyes were open, the room was dark, the walls breathed in and out. I realized I was humming, not aloud, in my chest, involuntarily. The rhythm was back, faster now, and inside the silence I heard it, a word broadcast from somewhere deep inside my skull. Transmit. I fought to sit up, fought to move my mouth. When I finally did, I screamed, not words, just noise, my own noise. The humming stopped, the rhythm faltered. The thing inside me recoiled, and I knew that was the answer. Noise, real noise, chaos. My voice unpatterned, unsynced, uncontrolled. I told Dad everything the next morning. He listened, and then he made a plan. That afternoon, we drove to the quarry. We brought speakers, cables, instruments, feedback loops. We wired the whole shoreline with every kind of sound we could make. No rhythm, no melody, just disruption. And then, at sunset, I stood at the edge of the water and screamed. Into the sky, into the rocks, into the signal, every scream raw and out of tune. And slowly, the pressure lifted, not all at once, but enough. I felt the second rhythm skip, then stagger, then fade. It didn't vanish entirely, but it stopped being in charge. We left the equipment behind, let it play until the batteries died. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking. The next morning, Dad handed me a journal. Blank. He said, if it ever comes back, if you ever feel it again, don't speak, write, record only in silence. I nodded, and I followed that rule since. That was months ago. The radio's ashes are still buried in the backyard. We planted wildflowers over them. They grow in odd spirals. I don't touch them. Sometimes I feel it twitch beneath my ribs. Not a voice, not a command, just curiosity. But I don't answer. I fill the house with static, with music, with off-key humming. I leave no silence to inhabit. And every night before bed, I write one sentence in the journal. Just one. The same sentence my dad used to say when he thought I couldn't hear him, alone in the living room with the dial turned to nothing. I hear you, but I never write the second part. The part I know the signal is still waiting to hear. Now I'm listening, because I'm not, and I never will be.